Ronald, welcome once again in Česká Skalice and in LUXFER. Today we have an interview with you as part of our LOSA talks, a new series of interviews and lectures by leading people in cultural life and maybe science, some crossovers, with which we hope to trigger the audience to dive in deeper with some creators and thinkers in Europe and maybe around the world. Well, we are here in your exhibition that we are gonna open tonight. We're sitting in front of a piece of a man holding a woman with a blood between her legs with the title Miscarriage. Mm-hmm. There's no way to misinterpret that image and the title. I think it's quite straightforward. And it's the first painting we see when we enter the gallery. Can you maybe tell why you painted two of those, or maybe there are more?
No, there are more.
I
think I painted 6 versions. Also
six
some
versions.
on paper, for oil pastel. When I started painting, there has to be more trigger points than one point. It was in a period that we were trying to have children, which was unsuccessful. So in a way that was, I mean, my wife never had a miscarriage, but but every time she had her period, it was not a real miscarriage, but it was something like that. And at the same time, I saw a movie. I was watching a movie where a couple, and she was pregnant, and they were expecting a baby, and it was a little bit dangerous, but it all went well. And then I thought, it can also go wrong to have a miscarriage. And then I thought, because I had that, let's say that trauma also a little bit from our personal situation, and then I start. When I have an idea like that, I make a small sketch on paper, and then I think, is it been done before, and how, if it's been done before in art history, how it's done. And then I found out that I couldn't find in painting. I could not find a story like that. And then I thought, so because I was raised as a Catholic, I thought, it's also a kind of pietà, but then the other way around. And then I go to, with my sketches, I go to a casting office where you can hire actors, professional actors for movies and theater. And then together with the casting director, I choose actors from which they think they have no problem with playing this. And then I stage it in my studio. I buy, in this painting, I buy a pyjama, and then I thought, it's nice to have a little cherry pyjama for her, also in relation with the blood. And I thought then it's also less boring, but that's more or less a little bit, maybe too detailed.
Yes.
And then I'm also thinking, if I talk too much, it's you can cut me off.
Not at all, please.
So, but then I was, so when I have this idea, I also think, I start thinking, when it's going to happen? Is it kind of miscarriage from a 16-year-old or 17-year-old, really young woman? Or maybe it's a miscarriage of someone who's 45, 46, when it's the last chance? Or is it in the beginning of the 30s, and these are... And then also in what social circumstances is, and I thought, let's make it a little bit basic, like social housing, not in a jacuzzi or something, because then the focus is then somewhere else. And so finally, I choose the bathroom where I was my own bathroom, where I was living as at that moment in the social housing apartment.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I see. We talk a bit later, I think, about the title, because miscarriage doesn't imply any war zone, or it is personal, like you say, in somebody's bathroom in a social apartment. But you would imagine it will be in Amsterdam and not in Rwanda or Srebrenica. but the figures are quite, let's say, powerful, and it impacts the people a lot, and you use a lot of white space around it. Is it because it is too heavy? If you would lower the height of the painting, would it be too impactful? For example, if it would just be cut off above the head of the man?
Yeah, I think so.
Would be too much.
When was it? When it was also in the 90s. I saw an interview with Orson Welles, and he made this movie. What was the name of this famous Citizen Kane? And he said then during the interview that he was the first one to paint, to film ceilings, because normally you would have the microphone hanging, so you could not film ceilings. But he made a kind of trick, not that you see a ceiling right here, but there's a way up. And then he said, well, psychologically it works better, because then you have space, and then as a viewer you can, it's as if you're almost there. And then I started to look especially at the birth of Jesus, so these Christmas paintings, and then a lot of these paintings have a ceiling from the little barn where Jesus was, and then I started to compare them. You know, if there was no ceiling, which one was better, and if there was a ceiling.
Yeah, it's like under the same roof with the people that you're watching.
Yeah,
you're in the same room with them.
In almost every painting, I try to make an empty space, so that you, as if you enter the theater or the
stage.
Yeah, it's not something new. I mean, Caravaggio also did it in a lot of paintings. That you have the action scene here, and then on the right side it's empty, or the other way around.
Yeah. Well, I had it with watching more of your paintings with the roof and the architectural spaces, which are something like boxes. It also enhances the feeling that you can't get out anymore at some point. So when you see more of the works and there's a very concentrated drama going on, and you look away where you should be able to escape, but then there is not really an escape. There's a wall which bounces back into a next wall, and you're back with the people who are suffering, let's say. So there is something like visual relaxation, but never an escape, let's say, as I saw it. Well, maybe we can talk about the title of this work compared to, for example, the title of the work that we are viewing next to us, which is, I think, Weeping Women in Rwanda. Mm-hmm. Well, makes me wonder about the titles, and of course I have some ideas about that. But here you added, you didn't choose like miscarriage, weeping women. You said like in Rwanda. So maybe
it was
how that works with titles.
So in the beginning of when I left art school, I just gave, let's say, simple titles: execution, miscarriage. But later on, I thought, maybe it's also interesting to make it. To give the work a title as if it's a documentary, as if I'm a war correspondent or in a way, a journalist who paints. So then I also use the location more or less and the year when it's happening, and So for instance, that one, I was watching news, of course, in the 90s, and you saw this genocide happening in Rwanda. Almost at the same time as the genocide in Srebrenica. But I didn't want to paint the actual killing, so I waited a few years, and then but it stayed on my mind, and then I kept on reading, and one of my friends, or someone I know, he's a jurist. He's a lawman, and he was working there also. Not so much related to the genocide stories, but he explained me some things about how they were dealing with the people who were the victims, if they were not dead, and also with the perpetrators. And they set up because there were so many people involved. I think 150,000, perpetrators. So it was impossible to
all
build up
together.
a court case. So then they went back to an old system, which is called cachacha. It means something like justice on the grass. Because they were all neighbors, you know. It was not a war between two countries, but they killed each. I mean, the Hutus killed the Tutsis. In most cases, sometimes it was also not so clear who was Tutsi and who was Hutu. But anyway, but it was almost a little bit like the same that they did in South Africa. This truth and reconciliation system. So if the perpetrators, or let's say the suspects, were brought to this field, they always had two microphones, which also was interesting. So one for God, and one for the people. And if you would, it was not like in South Africa that if you would say, would testify what you did, you could go free. But there it was if you were a suspect and you testified before, in the beginning of the court case, you would get less punishment. So it's not really like that, but if you would testify, you would get 10 years, and if you didn't testify but found guilty, you would get 25. It's a little bit different, but it also depends on
more or less,
what you are a suspect of. But because in what I learned from the tribunals in The Hague, the war tribunals, that it's really hard to get perpetrators to confess, which is a really traumatic experience for the victims, because they want to hear that someone is responsible for it. And when perpetrators don't speak, or just say, well, I had to do it, but when they don't show
remorse.
That's quite traumatic also.
Yeah, so it's very important to be acknowledged in your pain, and that the justice system functions to a certain degree. You can lock up people, but if they don't think they are guilty, maybe they aren't really guilty if they are, especially with a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
If you lock up 200,000 people who really believe that they aren't guilty, it's a very weird idea, or?
Yeah.
And these two women?
No, she's testifying in a way that she's a victim, and she's crying, so she's really in pain, so she falls down on her knees, and then one of her friends is trying to hold her while she's testifying. And telling the story about what happened to, what she saw, or what happened to her.
And your composition in a painting like this, it's based on stories that are told in what kind of environment the lawsuit takes place, or is this your imagination that looks like that, or?
No, so I started reading about it and also collecting images, and because there were quite some images on the internet on how it all worked, also documentaries, and then but the thing, well, a lot of times it's, let's say, images from journalists are not so usable for a painter. I mean, and you have to make your own composition. And,
somehow maybe it cannot be too spectacular, too good in some way, because it's taking away all attention from the real pain of these people. Or if you overdo it, so you have to find some.
Yeah, you have to find your layers. Yeah.
Layers of.
And that's how you paint it. You know, I try to paint it quite slowly, because if I would paint it like a photograph, you know, realistic, it's not that I don't like it, but I think then okay, you can see it in a glimpse, or but you need to create time if it's possible, because then people slowly start thinking. It's like a boring movie, you know. Then you start thinking about your own thoughts, and but if you see a spectacular movie, which is also fine. I mean, it depends on the subject, of course. Then it's a popcorn movie, and then you didn't think for 2 hours. But if they can also look at how it's done, and then when it's a little bit, let's say, difficult done, I mean, with different layers, I hope to create more time for the...
Yeah, for me it definitely works, and on top of it,
but it's not that I think it's necessary to make a good painting.
Yeah, that could be maybe somebody else, another author with another kind of being could create this similar type of effect in a different technique.
Yeah,
I understand you with that. What I find striking in combination with your approach of how you exactly paint it and the time that you take is that although the images we see aren't cheerful, still it gives me something like a positive feeling in the sense that you are really genuine with your subject and you really feel with these people, which is something also very beautiful and hard. So it doesn't get cynical at all, and I think that is very strong in this approach. That when you look at the exhibition, although terrible things are happening, and which stay in your mind and you reflect on it, it's never cynical, and and that is something very positive. Maybe in this time, where the truth is lost, maybe, or we don't have anybody who takes anything serious anymore. So is that something you maybe want to put in there, or is it something like an outcome which is just your core being, you think, or is it something you work on to stay?
Yeah, in a way they are
side?
also thinking models. And then when you don't show, well, it's not in these paintings, in these two, but if you don't show empathy, also understanding for the perpetrator, then it's a one-dimensional saying, because we don't know how we would act if we were 18 and living in Germany in the 1940s, or how you can get brainwashed in Rwanda when you're... I mean, I don't think you can judge those people. It's not that I don't think that they should be judged afterwards, but before that, it's... I mean, because there are so many people cruel, so who would say that you wouldn't do that, especially when you were young, maybe, or brainwashed, or forced, or whatever.
Yeah. I think it's a very beautiful example also in the painting that we have there, the suicide in an Egypt prison. There's also very unclear what we're watching exactly. There's a man with a nail on his forehead, which he's holding with one hand, and the other hand has a brick, and it looks like he's gonna ram that nail or drive that nail into his skull. And there's another man sitting next to him, looking away. But those men also look very similar to each other. They could be exchangeable figures, like randomly.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's who in that game?
So in 2011, the Arab Spring started, in the north of Africa, and then more or less everybody, a lot of people were full of hope, that these dictators and that they would, that people would get rid of the dictators, that there would be something like a democracy, but it all went totally bad finally. So, and this is happening in Egypt, and then when the dictator was put aside, the people had a chance to vote, and then the Muslim Brotherhood won, but they had a really bad regime also, so they were kicked out also, and then Al-Sisi came, well, he's still the president, but I think when I painted it, there were more than 60,000 political prisoners in Egypt and living under hard circumstances, torture, etc. But it can be all kinds of political prisoners, let's say fundamentalistic Muslims, but and left-wing students. And then I thought, okay, what's happening there? When it's not clear what you did wrong, when there's no trial or whatever, that you can get, really hopeless and just kill yourself. And then I thought maybe it's interesting to put, because first I thought to paint him alone, and then I thought, okay, maybe it's interesting to put someone next to him who's happening it, and then we might be identifying with the other one.
Yeah.
Because you feel sorry for him. I think it works. It triggers your own identification.
Yeah, no, it definitely works. But also it works for me in the sense that suicide is also a crime, right? It is by law, I think, a crime to kill yourself, but it's also a crime to not keep somebody from killing somebody. So you see also two crimes, although they are victim of another crime to put them away, but they maybe already committed crimes in the ones who put them away, so you get into some web of crimes and fake stories where you really lose the sight on truth or what to say about it. And I started to think that I'm probably also part of it, that web of humanity and wrong and good decisions and what those are. So I think it's an intriguing piece to shake your foundations, and what you thought was a solid base of morality starts to crack down below you, and you become aware that also that morality is very personal and changing in time and changing in the system you live in, but also in the family maybe, or era and so on. So yeah, I found it a very fascinating piece, and also again, okay, here's a window you could look out, but not really, because there's black behind
dark,
the window.
yeah.
So you're again locked in a certain box with no escape. There is a space around these people, so we can again look away with our eyes. We don't necessarily have to watch these people, but we cannot get out. So there is a choice, like the man sitting there, to look the other way, but still you're in the box. So does it matter then to look away, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find these paintings of, well, violence or violence that's going to happen intriguing. But what I find maybe even more intriguing, and that will be maybe something we can discuss now, is that the horror is probably mainly in your head, because the man maybe he doesn't drive the nail into his forehead, or maybe it was not all so bad. Maybe she's weeping because somebody is released. We don't know for sure, but we put out probably darkest thoughts to these scenarios that you paint. You invite the crime in somebody's brain, and there it starts to grow and make new stories. Is that a certain technique that you use to depict it on a certain moment, a certain activity or crime, let's say? Well, crime is in the eye of the beholder, let's say, but how do you judge where is the maximum result over a longer period of time of a certain image?
Yeah, I must say, I mean, I think about it, and I try to think about different moments when something is happening, but it's also intuitive, you know, because of course I thought, well, I could also paint, let's say, the embryo that's out, or that he's sitting on the toilet, and then you see the embryo laying down in the toilet. Yeah, there are always these things. So which moment do you choose? Yeah, I think it's interesting. It depends, you know, but I think it's for the viewer. I mean, to get the attention of the viewer, more interesting to just do it before, you know, not when he's dead, or when the perpetrators are locked up, or because then more or less it's the end of the story. Yeah. And you need this because it's not a. I mean, there are narrative paintings, but I don't make like the crucifixions. You know, you make.
Yeah, I totally understand it. There's
from the beginning till the end.
Maybe one painting we have there, which is an opposite narrative. It's an aftermath painting. It's a flower growing on a mass grave, a specific type of flower grows on certain
when I was
dead bodies, or
interviewing people who were involved in the war in former Yugoslavia. In the beginning of, let's say around 20 years ago, I was there, and I was showed around by someone who survived Srebrenica. He escaped, but his father was killed, and then he took me to the place where his father was killed, and then he showed me that there was different vegetation because all the bodies were still in the ground. So you have different earths, and then you have a different intensity of flowers. So I start photographing those flowers, and also I found out a little bit later, he didn't tell me that, but because there are so many of a typical flower, you get special butterflies, blue butterflies, who are more or less in a huge amount. And then, because when they are looking for new mass graves, because sometimes they don't know where the bodies are, then they more or less suspect that there is a mass grave when there are a lot of blue butterflies.
Yeah. So in this painting,
So I painted the flowers on the mass grave.
Yeah. And what is the title of this painting, for example? Just flower or flower on a grave, or just
no?
flower?
In the beginning, I called it Srebrenica.
Yeah.
And then at a certain moment, I just changed it into wildflowers.
Yeah. And then you might find out the story, or you might not find out.
No, I always tell it.
Yeah. If somebody would come to the gallery and ask somebody, they would provide the information, or it is some tension that you want to keep, or no?
No, sometimes I put a little text around it. Aside it. Depends.
Yeah.
But I also like the idea that there's a kind of suspension, that you feel something. Well, these are not normal flowers. I mean, they are normal flowers, but why would he paint flowers in?
They're quite
not
black earth around them, and they're pretty white themselves. So there's a bit like
because also the images. I mean, it looks natural, but it's impossible. I mean, to have a flower which is so light and then with a dark background, but you think it's not.
Something is
normal.
off. Something is off. Yeah, it's not a normal.
Not normal,
life.
but you believe it somehow.
Yeah. So, this let's say your career, to give a total, let's say, understanding of where the works maybe origined. It was a painting of a child porn that it was pretty big painting. I think I remember, where some people are sexually abusing little children, and you were exhibiting it, and it became a lawsuit against you or the gallery that it should be taken off the wall, right?
Yeah. It was in. It's a long story, but a complex story also, because I showed that piece of work in the Stedelijk Museum I think in 1996, 1997, somewhere like that. And then they had a small department for younger artists at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, which was called Stedelijk Museum Bureau Amsterdam, especially for artists who were living in Amsterdam. And there was no problem at that moment. And then I was honored by a prize, and I was in the countryside. But also that was exhibited after the summer, and during that summer there was a huge sexual abuse case in Belgium, which was Marc Dutroux, and he killed and raped many young children, and there was a whole system with other people. And I must say, I warned the museum also, because I said, well, maybe it's... But the museum said, no, it's fine, it's art, and so I said, okay, no, let's go for it. But then the public started to complain, and they called the police, and then the prosecutor came, and he, I don't know if it was he or she, but the prosecutor said it's not allowed to show an image where children are in a sexual intercourse with an adult. So if the museum doesn't take away the painting, then we are going to prosecute the museum. And then I thought, okay, but then I have to fight against it because otherwise the painting will be guilty, and me also. So then I contacted a really good lawyer. I didn't know that he was so good, but I was introduced to him, and then we had a kind of difficult court case because we went to court, and then virtually the painting had to come back to the museum, and then the prosecutor could attack the museum, but I had a contract with the museum, and so maybe it's too difficult, but I was also protesting against first I was protesting against the museum because I had a contract that I would show that work, and then we could fight between the lawyer of the state, which also rarely happens, you know, especially that. But during the court case, the prosecutor or the country lawyer, they dropped the case. Then they said, well, it's provocative and it's maybe people get wrong ideas and would do something like that, but it's
not unlawful.
Yeah, and then finally the judge said after a few days, well, it's a critical painting and nothing happened, you know, so the painting should be brought back.
Yeah, but I must imagine for a painter it must have been quite a changing event, because suddenly your work...
It was interesting because I was so young then.
Young,
I mean, I was halfway my 20s, and I was supported by the lawyer and by my gallerist and my family and Suzanne also. So I was not afraid, you know. I mean, it could also be a different case and
turn around against you.
Yeah, but the only thing was, so I asked my lawyer, can I also give a small speech at the court? And he said, yeah, that's okay. And then I saw because it was my first time also in court, and you see all these, oh wow, these formal people, you know, with the black dresses and the white thing, and then the photographs of the Queen. So and then I thought, okay, I got a little bit emotional. I didn't have to cry, but I was this swallow thing. But I gave my speech. But I must say, but nowadays, I was happy that it was in the 90s, because now with this cancel culture, I don't know if I
could have
dealt with it.
Totally different. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and then you make a painting like that. you continue working for by now almost 4 decades, and so you are more aware that something like that can happen. Are you then also changing some topics, or you find there are some taboos that you rather don't want to go there again, or to push it, that it will be too easy?
To me it's not so clear how I think about it, because I know that in 2010 we went to New York with my Dutch gallery, and we had an exhibition there at an art fair, you know, just a few paintings, but there were paintings about conflict in West Africa, and then a lot of people asked, oh, is the artist black, you know? Yeah. And when when my gallerist told me that no, he's a white, then they said, okay, then I'm not going to buy it, because so I kept thinking about it years and years, you know, to find a kind of balance, which is because it's a quite difficult subject also, this identity politics, and especially when you're dealing with the trauma of other people, and sometimes also with my own trauma. But finally I think I'm okay with it. I mean, I don't try to think about it so much, because it's also a power game. Yeah. And who is privileged, you know? Yeah. If you have an African background, you know, generations ago, and you're living already for decades in Western Europe, then you're also privileged, you know? Are you then, I mean, who's right to speak about whom? I mean, if you think that completely true, it's a dead end. Yeah. Then you can, you can only talk about yourself, but that's the end of journalism, that's the end of lawyers, that's the end of psychiatry, and
No, I think you are totally entitled to paint about anything, and and everyone that you like. But if you know in your studio there is a public opinion out there, and people are ready to, let's say, kill you in the news, or on an art fair start to comment on things or attack you, it must somehow change the feeling. So you have to close off maybe for everything and just, it is what it is, and when it's out, what happens, happens.
I try. Well, it's almost impossible, but I tried to keep that away in my studio. But I'm sure that people think about it. Yeah, but it's also a complex thing, because it's not only about identity politics, but it's also about power relations. So if you are a colored person, there was almost no space also in the art world, and also when you were female. So it's not. So they're also looking for arguments to get rid of the white males. I don't think it's the right argument, but I understand their battle, of course.
Yeah, everybody is somehow in a struggle.
Yeah, but it's really confusing also, because last week, 2 weeks ago, if I've gone too far, it's not about me, but there's a textile exhibition at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, in the underground space, which is huge, and more or less all the artists are female. And then the art critic wrote, finally, we are allowed to see this, and all these women they don't paint because painting is so masculine, and it's. But then I thought, wow, I mean, women have been using textile for ages, and also men in India and in Africa, and so it's not a specific, female thing. And then the art critic said, well, finally get rid of these Bukito, these masculine paintings of Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman. And I think, Mark Rothko, he killed himself. You know? He was a migrant, you know. I mean, he was traumatized, and
only so, now it's a build-up.
Because he became so famous doesn't mean that he's such a masculine painter.
And what it is now, it maybe wasn't back then when he was struggling, right? Maybe now it is a symbol of it through the people who deal in that art, but doesn't mean the artist was that type. So, okay, then you have spent maybe 20, 30 years working on topics which are haven't been painted yet before. Let's say we're not present in art history. Some topics of violence, war, human suffering, but it can be this kind of personal pain like we see here. Well, still, it's very interesting to me because this is a personal experience, which is for many people it may be even more confronting than some war, because many people know about this. So to me, in your oeuvre, this is also very, very interesting. The miscarriage painting series, 6 apparently, because it is a way in for everybody to feel pain and to open up the harness and to start feeling, and then maybe other things also enter more deeply than maybe you relate to somebody crying in a country you've never been to. And then, I don't know exactly how long ago, but maybe 5, 7 years ago, you also started to pick up some other, you evolved some topics, because you have been painting trees in the background, and I mean earth and flowers. But then there was at some point the absence of terror or absence of...
So, there was actually, it was big fun to think about it, because when I was really young, my father had a quite a big voliere, bird cage, and sometimes we would go to these bird shows. in the countryside, but there was always a department of paintings, and then you saw these countryside paintings. You saw a fox with a dead bird, or a landscape, or this, let's say, Sunday paintings, and I was always going there. And when I was at art school, I sometimes I would paint a cow, but then a small one. But then at a certain moment I thought, well, because I didn't want to paint the violence, extreme violence at a certain moment, because then I thought, well, maybe it's nice to, or interesting to try to paint the trauma, but the trauma is quite difficult because, well, how can you paint what's happening in someone's head? And I was thinking about, let's say, the Sunday paintings, and I thought, oh, maybe it's also nice to introduce, let's say, themes that are not allowed. No, not allowed, that's not completely true, but who are not used anymore. Let's say more the folk paintings, because I also have a weakness for folk paintings. So when I go to Austria or France, and you go to these little hotels or restaurants, or even in the Dutch countryside, or the bar where we are here around the corner at the square, you see these paintings of the, and I always liked those ones too. I mean, maybe when you see them in the MoMA in New York, then you would think, well, should it be here? But I still like the dedication of those painters. And I thought, okay, let's relate also to them, because we are the same, more or less. Because I have more professional time, but the love is the same. Or the, So I thought, that's maybe nice. And then, but they still are a little bit dramatic.
Yeah, but then how did you start with the first one? Do you remember was it the clear breaking point that you said, now I'm done with these paintings and I'm continuing with those, or you did in between?
I still had the ideas for the let's say the more cruel paintings. But then I went to France to visit a friend, and who was living in a really abandoned place in northwest of France, northeast of France. And his wife took me to an old farm from the 1600s, something like that. And then when I saw that farm, I thought, that's also beautiful to paint, And then I met the farmers and we spoke, and it was a nice story because the grandsons took over the farm, and the grandfather and grandmother were also living there. And
so you related to it.
And it's a small farm, so I thought it's also nice on, let's say, on a scale of, let's say, mass production, which is, well, we are always, probably it's also here in Czech, but this mass stables where hundreds of cows are living, and they don't go outside.
Mega stables, So you were drawn back to this kind of like a small farming, maybe from 30 years ago.
And I wanted to paint the romantic side, more or less. Okay, of course, someone who's vegan, vegetarian, don't see the romantic side, but I see it. And then I also thought it's interesting that a landscape with animals, with domesticated animals, it's not the same anymore as in the time of Vincent van Gogh or the paintings from the 19th century. I mean, it's, also that landscape or the farm life now is also under attack.
Yeah, so gradually even what is romantic has changed. Like it would have been a mega stable in the time of Van Gogh, and we see it as a cute small farm. Maybe something like that as well. And just something very practical, because I know that you are ordering the frames and somebody has stretched it for you very beautifully. But then when you get in mind a new topic, do you just take some piece of linen on the spot and start painting, or you make photos and you order paintings in an exact size, white canvases, to start in the studio? Or?
No, first I make the photographs of the actors or the models, and then I make small drawings, and then I try to find out how big the painting should be.
But also with this farm, you wanted to paint that farm, and you...
Yeah, but there's also a kind of size that I really like. It's 3.5 by 5.5 meters. So I also sometimes try to fit it in that size.
Yeah, so there's a standard size for your work.
Yeah.
And if you come to a new subject, it has to fit, or it should fit in those standard panels that you use. To create a new piece.
Because I want to paint more or less one-to-one. That you can still see the brush strokes and not like a precise painting.
All right. Then we have here two animals standing alone in the dark night. When we were talking about it a little bit, we talked about sleeping outside as a human or ourselves, which is pretty hard and uncomfortable. And you said that when you looked at the sheep, you have a few sheep at home, just before the night falls, that you realize that animal is going to sleep, let's say in the painting, in the darkness. Is it some feeling of sympathy for that animal, or is it a symbolic idea that animals are also stronger, or again, you have different interpretation points that will be in that painting for more visitors, let's say.
Yeah, especially with the sheep, it's also interesting because I started it because of that reason, because I was impressed that they sleep at night outside, because I was a little bit, because when we start living on this little farm, I thought, oh, that's nice, I'm going to sleep outside, but then after a few months I found out which birds are going, the rats and the other animals and the insects, and I thought, okay, I'll stay inside. And but then I thought that's a nice moment just before dark to paint this sheep, and that's a story that I didn't meant to tell, but I found out later that that there's an issue. Are we domesticated by the sheep, or are we domesticating the sheep? Because the sheep became so popular, and because of the sheep we started villages, and we could leave the hunting area. But the sheep, they destroyed more or less whole Europe, and especially Britain. I mean, there's hardly trees anymore because they need the grass for the sheep. But also, especially in Scotland, which was I don't know exactly the numbers, but it was quite populated in the 18th century. But the big farmers, they kicked out all the small farmers. They sent them to Australia or to New Zealand. Sometimes by paying them off and paying their tickets, but sometimes also by burning their little farms. Now it's a completely treeless area, because the sheep, they eat the side of the trees, and then the tree dies.
Yeah. So again,
but there was not a story.
Not a normal sheep we are looking at.
So how violent is the sheep also? Yeah. And we became much more violent also because we started to live in villages.
Yeah. So the sheep are responsible for the paintings you made before. So is it maybe some flashback in history?
Yeah, you could say that. The sheep is responsible for communism.
Yeah, they brought people together and live in villages and everything that's territorial things that came from that. And on the other side we have a calf, painting of a calf also on a very dark background. Calf almost looks something like a little bit like very vulnerable, but also a bit like transparent or gloomy. There's something like a greenish opaque color inside of the calf. Is it a calf that you saw somewhere, or you made up that calf, or it was in the farm of your friend, or how do you get?
No, I found this one on the internet. I was looking for calves because let's say our neighbors, they so the land where we are living is quite wet. So an adult cow cannot walk there, because I can walk there, but it will destroy the grass. And they need the grass to make a hay also. So that sometimes they have the calves there, and I thought, oh, that's nice. But I couldn't make a good picture of them. And then I started looking on the internet, and then I found this one. But I also knew that, so especially in the Netherlands, not every farmer, but almost every farmer, so as soon as a calf is born, they take it away from the mother cow, because otherwise they get a emotional connection, and then if the calf has been taken away after 3 months, the mother starts screaming for weeks, and but also at night, and the farmers don't want that noise. But the bad thing is that the cows don't drink the mother milk anymore, and the mother milk is full of it's a kind of antibiotics. So almost all the calves get sick, diarrhea, and and that's also why sometimes they have a wrong tail, because they're shitting all the time, so the tail grows wrong way, grows up. Yeah.
So we see like in general, I think in almost all your paintings with animals, are herd animals which are depicted as individuals. Is there some? I know that you're not a vegetarian, but is there some message in it to look closer to animals, to respect them more, or is it a?
Yeah, that's certainly a point. I'm not against meat eating, but I think it's good not to eat so much meat, but especially give the animals more or less a decent life, and because we are so far away from animals.
Yeah. And a total other interpretation that I had when I was watching all your works, coming more from the herd morality that Nietzsche describes, and the problems that it might give to, well, let's say, what was more accepted in the past, the creative genius, which these days it is almost something like a taboo to be better at something than somebody else. Everybody, you also like matters as a folk painter, or everybody does a good job and everybody equally can be respected, which sounds all great. But is there also something like an underlying comment in that sense, that maybe it is needed that somebody is actually better at something and should be rewarded also to that?
No, that's an interesting question, because nowadays, I don't know how it is here, but this identity politics that we spoke about, so it's quite difficult now to talk about quality, because, well, maybe it was always been like that, but now it also depends which is your background. Are you queer, or are you female, or transgender, or you have you're colored, or and then sometimes they would pick you out because of your identity, and that's it's a complex situation also for the people who have these identities that are more in favor at the moment, because sometimes, let's say to some of my black friends, sometimes from the black community, they say, well, you have to paint about slavery, but then they say, well, I don't want to, I want to make an abstract painting, I don't want to so, but then sometimes they're not forced, but they're feeling the pressure of, then you have to hit that topic also, and if you don't hit that topic, you're also cancelled in a way.
Yeah. So there's very hard to make a piece of art which is just on its cover. It is really about the person behind it more and more, it seems, and its or hers, his identity, and the story that tells. And maybe also exhibitions are more based on some themes which are trending at that moment, and not necessarily just a classic good piece of art. But I thought about, when I saw these individual herd animals, that they're also brave to be outside of the herd, right? And although they sleeping in the dark is more brave than being a sick calf. But yeah, I found it also a good topic, or an important topic to reflect on. And well, your paintings never give clear answers, and you keep continuously reflecting on it, which is your latest paintings. The light is changing. It's getting darker. It looks like. Is there a reason for it?
Yeah, it's also a long story, but the last paintings I did were more or less about country life. So I made a huge painting of our daughter feeding the chickens, and another one is that one of our sheep is being sheared. And the start was I thought quite interesting. So I met a curator, an art historian, and she used to work for the United Nations, and she was in control of the collection of the United Nations collection in Geneva. And she asked me a simple question: do you know a work of art that represents peace? And I said, yeah, of course I know. And then I started thinking of a work that really shows peace. It's not a painting with bees and flowers, but that you can feel the peace. And I asked so many friends also, can you give an example of a painting or an artwork that represents peace without showing, let's say, the pain? And then so I couldn't come up with something. And then she gave me she asked me, would you try to do it? And I said, okay, let's think about it. And then I thought, okay, I have to paint something about something that makes me happy. And then the story continues, because I painted that moment when one of our sheep was sheared, but I didn't paint fences, as if, it's a fictional painting in a way. So there are no borders, no fences, so the sheep could, and that there's a, let's say, perfect relationship between the farmer and the animals. And I tried to do it twice, also with our daughter feeding the chickens, and our chickens, they can walk around freely. If they can run away also, but they don't do that. But and then I also thought, because our daughter, she's from China, we adopted her, and then I thought, okay, well, there are a lot of paintings of the 17th, but especially in the 19th century in Dutch, but also in France, art history of these young farm girls feeding the chickens and so. And I thought, okay, maybe it's nice to make also tell the same story, but then on a bigger scale, and then with someone who's from Asia, to twist it around, and then also show that there are no borders.
Yeah, and a certain continuity in the theme over centuries, maybe, and that human.
That you can reload a theme like that, because if you nowadays would paint a beautiful farm girl, then it's almost a little bit kitschy.
Yeah.
But and then I also thought, well, a lot of people with a different background than people who are, let's say, migration background, they are hardly painted in the countryside. Most of them are painted in city life or inside a house or something. Then I said, okay, well, maybe it's also interesting to put them on the countryside. And then also because this polarization we have in our Dutch culture. The countryside against the city life, and then the fight between the left wings and the more conservative people. And then the conservative people, they don't go to the museum because they think it's only for progressive people. But then I think, almost everybody who's living or studying in the city, they all they have friends or family who are living on the countryside. So it's not such a if you look at closer at it, it should not be such a big difference, because we also go on holiday in the countryside. So.
Yeah, everything is.
And the countryside benefits a lot from, let's say, the knowledge that's built up in the cities, because in the countryside they also need doctors, but the doctors are studying
in Amsterdam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or in the big cities, at the universities.
Yeah. And this, because I also asked you about this changing a little bit of the colors of the paintings of violence are very often look like they are taking place in broad daylight, that the crime is not hidden by night, it's on plain sight happening, or even under some TL light in the bathroom. And the paintings that you have been doing recently, it seems that there's some twilight slipping in sometimes, or maybe it's later in the afternoon, as if there's some kind cover of the evening falling over the work. Is that something you maybe connect in your mind to something of like peace or safety, the end of the afternoon, or
yeah, but also to create
atmosphere.
A different kind of suspension, because one of the reasons was to use this, let's say, this TL light in the more cruel scenes is that it's not hidden anymore, the violence, and that's a lot of the paintings.
It's deliberate. Is it deliberate?
They hit a kind of moment where there's no trial. Even when you see when you watch at the execution of Goya. You see soldiers doing, and somehow you have the feeling that it's based on a trial, because you did something wrong, now we're going to kill you. But the absence of a trial or how do you say it? A system without a judge, I thought that's also interesting, because it makes people also crazy. Especially, for instance, in that one where someone is committing suicide, there's no trial. I mean,
yeah.
And then it's an interesting thing. So one of my friends, she's a documentary maker, and she had an interview. She did an interview with one of the survivors from the work camps in Siberia, and then this person said, "Well, Stalin was so powerful, and I have no idea why I had to be in that camp, but because Stalin said it, I thought, well, maybe he's right. I did something wrong. I mean, I don't know what I did wrong, but he's such an important person.
He must be right." Yeah, and even that can give some kind of comfort that even though it's not good, at least you have something to go by, some guideline.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think more people have that experience in not so nice regimes, that at least there was something to complain to about. It was not your problem if things went wrong, or not your mistake. You could blame it on somebody else. And that gives also a certain comfort. And if you are sole responsible for your own destiny, and well, if there's a law around it, maybe that is beautiful. But if there is lawlessness and you are just responsible for everything that happens to you, that is madness, or
no, that's quite interesting,
impossible.
Because I can say something about it. Something that was not part of my own research. I mean, I read it, but there's a book from Jean, and he was considered Jewish, and he had to spend some time in the concentration camps, but he survived, and he's a philosopher. And he wrote a book about, let's say, an essay about the difference between, let's say, the intellectuals in the concentration camps and the more labor-focused people. That the intellectuals died quite soon because they understood what was happening to them. But it's not only a physical thing, but also a mental thing. And then the more labor, the people who are more used to labor said, okay, we have just another boss. It's not so
roughly said. Yeah.
Not so simple, but
that makes sense. And I think in the many paintings that you have created about violence, there is it's like bouncing back on you like a boomerang. It gets back to you, that you realize that it is very possible that it happens to you also in your life, because you think that where you are living and the system you live in is permanent, but maybe you bring some awareness that things can change overnight.
We saw it a few years ago in America, this rage against the Capitol in Washington.
Yeah, so that is.
That's the energy, the bad energy was there.
Yeah, can pick up very quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe last thing before we close it off, all that weird, violent terror that you have been facing, painting, dealing with, living with, all taking place in these spaces that you paint, where you have barely any way to escape. Once you get in, I can imagine it takes decades until you kind of get out of it. Now you came out of it through the painting of some like rural life and some love of folk paintings. And then you also make the smaller paintings, which are not one-on-one, would also be very difficult when you paint a farm to paint it on the actual size. But it seems like you zoomed out and there is the box, but you're now outside of that box. You don't paint interiors anymore, but it's the exterior architectural structure, which you are kind of observing like small boxes or miniature
No, that's true.
Buildings. What is that about?
Yeah, I have a weak point for houses painted by other artists. So like Van Gogh painted really beautiful farmhouses, but also Munch painted some really, and they all have this tension, especially the ones with Munch, but also let's say the early ones of Van Gogh, which are also a little bit in the evening and. Well, he changed his palette when he went to France, but in the beginning it was quite dark. But also there's an artist that I really like. It's an Italian painter, more or less the same period as Van Gogh, just a few years later. His name is Secantini, and he also painted the rural life of life in on the border of Switzerland and Italy in the Alps. So sometimes you also get, no, not sometimes, you always also are inspired by other artists.
Yeah, and but those works are not missing in art history, like the topics you have painted before, they have been there, so you continue in a tradition that is already existing. You do it, of course, like you said, the farms changed during the time, so the paintings change and the atmosphere changes. And because you painted for decades violence, the farms or everything you paint now is infused by the history of your own paintings, or can you separate it for yourself,
no.
or you also see it?
I don't think I could be painting them if I didn't paint the other stories before. Because you don't only think about a new subject, but after years of painting, you also look back on what you did, and it's also nice and interesting to see if you can find new topics or find new stories. In that sense, sometimes I say that I'm an activist, but I'm not a hardcore activist because I also am an artist. And then you like to choose also different stories and see how can you relate to that.
And when you continue now painting in your studio and you're working on some new series, are you still trying to depict peace, or do you think you can better those images, or is it something that you will let go of for now or come back to later?
No, actually at the moment I'm working on a peace painting, and then you see a migrant family shopping in Amsterdam at the shopping mall, or at the square. They are quite young, and so he escaped from Syria in 2016, and she came a few years later together with their child. Because this migrant policy is is under attack.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, let's also show a happy family. I mean, and then you know that they are traumatized, of course, but you can't see it in the painting itself.
Yeah.
They look happy.
Is it maybe true that for now, peace in the state of humanity, as we have to maybe evolve a million more years to really be able to have peace without the opposite? We still can only have peace in the idea of a, I think it was called the exo definition in the talk that you had in Amsterdam. Or do you think it will be possible to paint it without the other, let's say?
Yeah, I don't...
Or get closer to it?
Yeah, but I mean, maybe it's a fictional illusion, but I also am trying to fight the gap between country life and city life, to take away, not to take away, but take people from the countryside with you. Maybe that is something that, let's say, the more progressive people didn't consider enough, you know. That's also why I like to be here, you know. And I'm really happy that you invited me here in this, this small village, and see what art can do. And then you're open for everybody who's living around, and then have a talk about it.
Yeah, you mean something like everybody has to be on board of the train, otherwise the train means nothing. If you drive with a few people towards luxury and the rest is
because
left behind.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have places like this in worldwide.
Thanks. Anything maybe you want to say that we missed, or something you want to add? Or
No.
We covered most of it, or we forgot something?
No,
drastically.
No. I'm just really happy that this is happening together with David Mosny, who's a great artist from the Czech Republic. It's important, I think.
Great. We are very pleased that you are here, and thanks for the talk, Ronald.
Thank you too.
Thanks.